Relevance. Before we went on the air, Robbie and I were talking about some points from last week, particularly that my friend G-Man thought that I could have answered better, and I come to find out that Robbie had his own discussions with G-Man on the point. Uh, so we were talking about was it uh the illogical nature of what was it? Me asking you the question: could humans come from anything other than humans?
Yeah,
Yeah, and pick it up right there, Rob.
yeah. Like last week, you had asked if I believed humans can come from anything other than humans, which my stance is that I understand evolution and what evolution can actually prove, and it shows that humans did evolve from something that was not identified as humans, more so than Neanderthals, and but when you had asked me if humans can come from something other than humans, I was thinking about it like that doesn't make sense because as a Christian, you believe, well, one of the roots of Christianity is believing in the creation story. And with the Christian story, it talks about Adam and Eve, which Adam was created first, but Adam was created, as the Bible says, from the dust of the earth. Which, in a nutshell, a lot of the Christian scientists who have backgrounds in evolution, that's what they argue, that created from the dust of the earth. In a nutshell, simplified, that's kind of what evolution is, what it's talking about. But where it says that God created Adam and then God created Eve from a rib of Adam, it's from a Christian standpoint, the position is that Adam was a human but was created from something that was not a human. So I mean, which there are a lot of people who always ask that where do humans come from? Humans can only give birth to other humans. It's like, well, then that rips apart your whole belief system too. It kind of doesn't make sense in a way.
Well, to that matter, now let me respond that my point at the time was none of us have observed, in actuality, humans coming from anything other than humans.
That's
We
true.
see that only humans produce other humans. So my hyper point was that left to just natural observation, we would conclude that life comes from other life, and that according to its kind, for us to pick up any other notion or to come to cling to any other idea about it would mean something was suggested, whether it be in word, by word of mouth of someone or some group of people, or in print, something that we read, something that we've been indoctrinated with, for us to think otherwise. So, my position was it's not natural for
Nah.
us to believe that life came uh, 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 from anything other than life according to its kind. It's against what we naturally observe. However, I do know, and I didn't articulate this well last week, but I do note that presents in and of itself a problem. Since let's say I'll get off the human example. Let's say we only see cows being born from a cow that was before it, and those cows that produced the next generation of cows, and so forth. That process is a chain. It is a cycle. If all the cows only come from cows, and it is the cows that produce other cows, it naturally leaves the question: well, where did the first cow come from? So we're left with two ideas right away. That as far as what we observe naturally, life comes from other life, and those lives produce according to their own kind. However, this law that we observe does not account for and cannot account for the production of the original life life, again, indifferent. And I believe that points to the supernatural. That God supernaturally created the first life forms, and He made them, as the Bible says, to for each kind to reproduce according to their own kind.
Yeah. So like my whole position on like abiogenesis of that we don't have, we can't observe the very first life form being created, which I'll never even try to argue with that point because I believe that too. We can observe many things, which that's why we have the scientific method in certain things. Like I didn't observe my great 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 grandparents dying, but it doesn't change the fact that I know they did die. It's things that even though we can't observe it, doesn't mean it didn't happen. Likewise, there are a lot of things that we can't really observe, but we still know it did happen because of how what the evidence points towards. Like if I was to walk down the street and I see somebody with a laying on the ground with a bullet hole in his head, even though I didn't see it happen, doesn't change the fact that I know this man was shot in the head. But like we can look at like human chromosome 2 as one example of humans coming from the primate type of the family because that's what human chromosome 2 has showed us, and the mountains of evidence supporting that it's like contradicted by nothing because it's like it did happen. You can also look at like the skeletal remains, the fossil remains of all these. When people ask what are the transcendent fossils, it's like every fossil is a transcendent fossil because it's constantly changing every so often. But like when we do observe these certain types of creatures, like the one I always use is the cat. The what we observe or know as a cat came from something that we did not identify as a cat, which is where type and family only exist in our minds. It doesn't exist in the scientific community because that's not how they, process and categorize, the evolutionary process. That's it. That's strictly species. But as far as like abiogenesis goes, like we as humans have just recently begun to start to, research into that area. But for to say that since we couldn't observe it, it points to supernatural, that's one of those things on the borderline of a logical fallacy. It's like saying I don't know, therefore God. Well, there's nothing wrong with saying I don't know. Like I'll say I don't know where the first one came from. I do know that we can observe that from that first one, it just has rapidly changed, and we can observe that as far back as we, have so far. But just saying that we just now recently begun to study abiogenesis doesn't mean that, in 100 years down the road or even 30 years from down the road, we may have the answer to that. But right now, I'll just say, yeah, I have no idea what that, how that first single-celled organism came to be. I'll say that till I'm blue in the face. Don't know, don't know, don't know. I just won't jump to conclusions about what I think it is because man, that really doesn't do any good right now. But yeah, I'm just really looking forward to see where they're going with the studies regarding abiogenesis go for. Like they've had some recent studies going on now with like using chicken broth, things like that. They're boiling them until they're dead because living organisms like can't survive past 165 degrees, which is why they like to boil them. But and things like that are still doing things that are like, well, this thing should be dead. All the organisms inside should be dead, and it's still doing things. That's kind of cool. It's kind of pretty cool.
I guess at a certain level, and I think I want to address a few points. I think at a certain level, I agree with abiogenesis in the fact that when it says God took and formed man's body from the dust of the earth, that dust was at that time non-living. So you could say that Christian theists believe in a supernaturally guided or supernaturally designed version of abiogenesis.
Yeah.
On that level. But I think the scripture accounts, if you think about it.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes.
Well, in response to that from the scripture, I would say that there is bound to be some biochemical, what's the word I'm looking for?
Similarities.
Yeah, similarities, genetic similarities between humans, not just the primates, but every other animal or land animal on the earth to a certain level. And I think that is the case that most, if not all, the animals we're genetically related to, and above 90%. And you go back into the scripture, and it says that God made not just humans, but all the land animals from the dust of the earth. So if God used the same source material to shape out all the different forms, and they were made by that same common designer, creator, God, I say that lends itself clearly to the necessity that there would be show up some type of similarity. So I don't think it's proof of evolution. I think it's proof of having the same creator being made from the same similar source material.
Yeah. Like, I think that right there would be a more believable thing for, someone like me if it were to say, whereas Eve was created from, parts of Adam, if the animals that were created were also created from parts of Adam, but for them to say that, well, from the scripturally speaking, it's just that God created this and God created that. It doesn't really get into the specifics of how He created it, except for Eve. Adam from the dust of the earth, Eve from the rib of Adam. Other than that, it just pretty much says He said, "Let there be this." There was that. He saw that it was good, and He called it this.
But
Since it doesn't get into detail, I mean, it could be arguable.
let me hold you at that point, Robbie.
Oh, okay.
Let me see if I have my print Bible on me. If not, I have to pull it up on my phone. Give me a second.
All right.
Uh, do I have? I just have household Bible. Let me see. And bear with me again, Rob. I'm still getting used to navigating this on my phone. Let me use the tablet. It'll be simpler. Okay. Here we go. All right. Genesis 2:19, and out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every beast, that was the name thereof. So out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air.
Okay. You see, like with that right there, that from the ground he created the animals, from the dust of the earth he created Adam, but that wouldn't leave genetic similarities because, well, the dirt dust doesn't have genetic characteristics. It only has elements inside of it. But so as far as it to say that there would be genetic similarities between the animals and Adam would be a huge you know it would be like a huge exaggeration as opposed to if the beasts were created from parts of Adam, I could say, okay, well, even scripturally speaking, Adam's DNA was inside the first animals. Therefore, of course, they're going to have genetic similarities now, which would help back up evolution tied into the Bible. But since that didn't happen, they were created from the earth, then it's like, okay, then there would be no genetic similarities, and genetic similarities won't just pop out of nowhere.
Well, Robbie, don't
So,
you believe? Well, do you believe in evolution?
I don't believe in it. It doesn't really
Or
require. Yeah, 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 that's what you're saying, though. Yeah,
you think that
yeah,
evolution is factual?
yes.
Okay. Does not everything that we know to be genetic ultimately rise up out of the elements?
What was that now?
Doesn't everything that we know to be genetic and biochemical ultimately structurally rise up out of the elements of the earth?
Chemical, yes. Genetics, no.
Well, it is the chemicals ultimately that lead to the production of genes.
In a way, like the way we identify and classify genes are by DNA, which chemical compounds as well as like dirt, plants, all that don't have DNA. So our genes are pretty much categorized by our DNA, which are only in certain types of creatures.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is what what does the DNA what constitutes the DNA?
DNA is from four types of chemicals.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you can, would you name those chemicals?
I believe like the so if I'm let me just try to not get them wrong. One I believe it's
Some
like
of them are kind of hard to
yeah.
pronounce.
So one of them is like
What is it? T
taurine.
G?
Uh,
Something about the
yeah,
letters.
one is like a taurine. No, not taurine. Thymine, adenine or adenine. I haven't pronounced that one. Guanine, and cytosine.
Yeah. Now, where do those come from?
They're from different types of things can produce adenine and guanine. Like this kind of like chemical, different other types of chemical fusions form those.
But at the root of all this, don't they arise up out of the elements?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like only certain and that's like only certain elements can fuse and create other elements with other elements. Like not all elements, like the elements that create dirt, like carbon. Carbon is the building block of all life. Everything that's pretty much contains life has carbon. Carbon is like the big boss, but other like certain types
Love
of
carbon.
yeah, and like certain types of chemicals and elements that are in things like dirt would not be found in humans or animals or plants or things like that because only certain elements can fuse with certain types of elements, whereas things like carbon would be in humans, and carbon is a lot of times not in things like rocks, dirt, etc., etc.
That being understood, I don't want to get lost in the sauce, if you will.
All
But
right.
my point was if the same source material, or rather, it is the elements of the earth that gives rise to the chemicals and that come to make up DNA, then all the animals and the humans being made, or rather the earth creatures and the humans being made of the same or similar elemental material, and also being guided in their forming by the same God who is supernatural and not bound to the laws of physics and so forth as we know them, but rather he orders or commands those laws to be so, can manipulate them at will, and therefore we have different structures but having some similarity. And I'm positing that that's the claim of the scripture.
Okay. Um. Oh snap.
Well,
But
that's right. It just came back to me where we left off on the conversation last week. You were saying, why doesn't God just reveal Himself or show Himself?
Um, but, my position would be that if God does exist and like God is actually characterized as he is portrayed in religion today as all knowing, all powerful, things like that, is he would know what would make me believe. And if he is all knowing, he would know what would make me actually believe. So people say, what would make you believe? I honestly, the best way I could answer that would be for me to witness something like a miracle, and not something like a rare event, but something that would defy the laws of nature as we know it. Like when we were talking about walking on water, since it said Jesus walked on water and Peter walked on water, who had his eyes on Jesus at the time, or had his focus on him, which helped him walk. Said, okay, well, for me to believe that, since I can show you the equation to prove to you why people can't walk on water, if I were to go out there and actually see someone do it, that would challenge those beliefs. It's like, wow, well, you just really did that. But things like that, if I were to see something like that, I would believe that happened. If I were to see things like people raising from the dead, as far as but then there are those people who say, oh, people do it all the time. Their heart stops, brain stops, and then they come back to life against medical things like that. I don't mean things like that. I'm talking like the resurrection type, like Lazarus. I'm talking like days later, days later,
Yeah,
because you have what we medically classify as dead, which is brain dead. Once your pulse stops, it's not coming back. That's as we classify as brain dead, and then that's when medically we classify you as dead. But since the body has a lot of electricity running through it, or in a matter of speaking, that can hotwire things like that, so they can come back and things like that, even though they're usually hooked up to an incubator after then, because your brain can't go that long without, you know, being alive, without oxygen getting to it. So then you're still alive, but then you're back on a tube. But so what would it would take to make me believe would be something like witnessing a miracle, something that defies the laws of nature as we know it, which doesn't really happen anymore. Even though there are claims of people saying, this happens, and it's like, yeah, well, there's also a natural explanation for things like that too. We can do things like that now. Making the blind see, making the deaf hear. We can do things like that now. I wouldn't really classify that as a miracle, because now that can be obtained by other natural means too. So that really doesn't defy the laws of nature. But something like walking on water would be something that would, make me believe. Um, if I were to actually see that, there are magicians who claim to do it, but then they actually explain and show how they actually do it, and they're not actually walking on water. So if I were to see something like that, that right there would make me. If I were to see something walk on water, that wouldn't make me believe in God, but that would definitely make me believe that, okay, there are things out there that do defy the laws of nature. I didn't realize that could actually happen. Now let's go from here. That would be a good starting point. But if God is actually exists, all knowing, all powerful, then He would actually know what it would take to make me believe. Then He would do. Well, I would say He would do it. Is that He could definitely do what it would take to make me believe that, because every person is different, and it says that people are going to be, people are going to believe through false teachings, I believe, or something like that. I can't remember what it says exactly. Like through the false teachings, people are going to come to Christ or something like that. But it's like, well, yeah, well, everyone's different, so I wouldn't really say that. But since everyone is different, everyone has their own method of what would make them believe, but I would say that he knows what would make me believe, and that just hasn't been revealed, and I'm just not made to go against those things already.
right.
That's a lot of information.
And that's cool, Robbie, because as much Christian out there starts off life as part of uh, what the scripture calls the world, part of the mass of flesh, the mass of human beings that are alienated from God because of sin, and so walking around dead in trespasses against God, walking according to lusts that are being perpetuated by this world and its ideas. At the top of that chain is Satan because he's ruling the power of the air and he's going manipulating the whole world according to lies that are against the knowledge of God. So us being alienated from God, we come into this world even estranged from God, and we have our works or our righteousness. They don't come to us inherently. But all that to say in short is that every Christian out there starts off life as an unbeliever. And those of us who are or who are really Christians and not just indoctrinated, professing to be Christians, are only believers because God did something in our heart to make us believe, and He also sustains that faith. But Jesus gave some answers to some of the hindrances that you expressed to me. First of all, he says at a point that he said it's an adulterous and sinful generation. He said that asks for a sign and a wonder. But he goes on to add to no such thing at another point. Uh, and let me back up because he said no sign will be given to you. But he also said that this is John 6:63. It is the spirit that quickeneth the flesh. No, pardon me. It is the spirit that quickeneth. The flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. So that's to say, any miracle that God can do or Jesus can do would attract your attention or any human being's attention for a little while, but as soon as the presence and the glory of God that was on them was out of sight, just a little while, it'll also be out of mind. Miracles do not convert the heart, and that's what God wants. That's what God is after. He's not merely after our faith for curiosity's sake or satisfying our curiosity or just for faith sake even, but he's after our faith for sake of our submission. Now, as I got into last week, even from old times, the scriptures tells us, what was it, Job 33? Let me look that up. I believe it's Job chapter 33, where the gentleman testifying to the work of God speaks that God works oftentimes revealing himself and his will to man. And he implies the idea that the false position is that it's blocked out how God generally speaks. I think he's getting at what we call natural revelation, man through creation sees such things which the Word of God says clearly shows the eternal nature and power of God. But pride in man blocks that out. But he says to get around man's pride, God speaks. Job 33, beginning in verse 1, God speaks once. Read twice, yet man perceives it not. In a dream, in a vision of the night, sleep falleth upon him, slumberings upon the bed. Then he opens the ears of men and sealeth their instruction, that he may withdraw man from his purpose and hide pride from him. He keeps back man's soul from affliction and man's life from perishing by the sword. He is chastened also with pain multitude of his bones were strong, so that his life that poureth bread and his soul fainteth not. His flesh is consumed away, that it cannot be seen, and his bones that were not seen stick out. Yes, his soul draws near unto the grave, and his life to the destroyers. If there be a messenger with him, interpreter, one among 1,000, to show unto a man his upright God's uprightness, then God is gracious unto him, and said, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. His flesh shall be fresher than a child's. He shall return to the days of his youth. He shall pray unto God, and he will be favorable unto him. And he shall see his face with joy, for he will render unto man his righteousness. God looketh upon man, and if any say, I have seen and perverted that which was right, and it did not profit him, God will deliver his soul from going down to the pit, and his life shall see the light. Lo, all things work with God oftentimes with man to bring back his soul from the pit to reunite with the light of the living. So the man of God is here saying that God works often to get around the pride of man and unbelief, whether dreams in the night where they can't run from God and praise ideas against the knowledge of God, whether it's giving putting sickness in their body, they humble their pride, even wasting disease. The description of this, as I said last week, sounds much like cancer and or a few other diseases that are common. Wasting disease to try to get man to turn away from his sin with the goal of ultimately uh, uh, being that confession that we see. What verse was that?
Mm.
Verse 27. God looks upon men, and if any say, I have sinned and perverted that which was right, and it profited not, or in our English, it did not profit me. I have
Yeah.
perverted which is right, and it did not profit me. God is looking for our confession. Why? Because our confession is an acknowledgement that our sin is not only wrong, a twisting of God's order and God's ways, but it also acknowledges that it has not been beneficial to us. There is no genuine sin until a person acknowledges that their sin is not only wrong, but it's also not beneficial. We pursue sin because we think it's beneficial. So God is looking for a change of the heart. And faith does not come by seeing miracles, but rather faith comes, just as the scripture says, by hearing and
Yeah.
hearing the word of God. There was a lot of people in Jesus' day who saw him do miracles, and they were attracted to him for a time, but they could not stand up under his teaching the word of God, and so in due time all those fell away, and only ones that received him really were those who not only saw the miracles, but moreover were receiving the counsel of God in their hearts from the Hebrew, but also having received the general teaching in their heart, and that opened them up to the secret counsel of God, which he only teaches the obedient. For there's a scripture, I believe it's in Psalm 25, which says, God will teach thee in the way. But the same couple, few verses, it says that he shall instruct the meek, the humble, those who are lowly in spirit, lowly according to pride. He shall instruct them in his way. So everybody will hear the teaching of God, but the only ones who really receive it are those who are humble in heart, those who are lowly in spirit.
Yeah. I
They
mean,
receive from God.
Yeah, with things like that, I really don't think it's as much as an issue with with the pride of humans as far as why people don't believe. Like I don't know if you ever have, but have you ever been called in for jury duty?
Yes.
Okay, right. I've actually been called in for jury duty twice. And I volunteered quite a few times. I love doing jury duty, but we had a couple cases that when I had sat in on, it's that when you sit there, you hear both sides. It's up to the prosecutioner to provide all the evidence to support the fact that the defendant committed this crime. They lay out all the evidence. They go through all the testimony. They go through all the eyewitness accounts. They go through the physical evidence. They go through the DNA, the all that other stuff. And you go back there as the jurors. You go back there and you discuss each and every one of these things. And when you sit there and you hear them talking about all these things about these people did, you said, okay. You sit there and you're saying, okay, well, so they made the claim that they committed this crime. They've provided all this evidence. Now, it's to you, it has that evidence convinced you that this person is guilty of this crime. You don't choose whether or not to believe this person did it or not. It has the evidence convinced you. So when you sit there and they provide all the evidence they want, it's like, wow, to me this person really did all this. Okay, you vote guilty. You sit there and say, well, I mean, they provide a lot of evidence, but it doesn't actually prove anything. Like if someone had very bad evidence, like I am on trial for murder, and the evidence that someone gives you, like you're going to be the juror in my case. They provide the evidence that my fingerprints are on the murder weapon. That's it. Well, that doesn't prove that I stabbed or it doesn't prove that I used that weapon to kill them. That only proves that I touched it at one point in time. So that's not enough. Really, that's not enough evidence for a logical person to say, "Oh, they're guilty. Their fingerprints are on it. They killed them." That doesn't prove anything. So for something like that I would never vote guilty for that. Whereas it's like if someone says your fingerprints are on the murder weapon, you have the receipt for this thing, someone saw the gun go off, saw you walking outside with the murder weapon, dropped it, got in your car, sped away. Okay, well, that's a lot more evidence to suggest you committed this crime, even though it's still, you know, questionable whether they actually pulled the trigger or stabbed him or whatever. But it's like, once you hear all this evidence, the evidence that they present to you in the court case, it's either going to convince you they did it or it's not going to convince you they did it, and then you vote based upon that. So it's like when you hear all these things, it's like, wow, to me, this person really did it, but I still don't actually believe they did, even though all this evidence is, you know, unquestionable. Like this person's DNA is inside of this woman, and they have him on camera raping this woman. But you know what? To me, I still don't really believe he did it. It's not more of a pride thing. It's whether or not what is presented to you convinces you, and you can't, choose whether or not it convinces you. It does or it doesn't, and then that's what you make your judgments based upon. Is that conviction? If it convinces you, you vote guilty. If it doesn't convince you, you vote not guilty. It doesn't. It's not really pride because you're not choosing to go against what your conviction is. Even though there are some people who do things like that, like in sympathy cases, like one of the ones that I always use in my pro-life versus pro-choice debates is Tay-Sachs disease. Would it be justified for a woman to terminate a pregnancy because now that they can test embryos for diseases, they can test them for things like Tay-Sachs disease? And I don't know if you're familiar with that. Tay-Sachs disease infects young children, mainly of the Jewish population, but
Yeah, I remember it from an episode of Law and Order SVU.
oh yeah, it's insanely agonizing, torturous pain. So it's like, would you, if you were a juror, would you vote someone guilty for you know, ending the life of their child, saving them from, days and days of excruciating pain because it is uncurable, untreatable. They're going to die. That's inevitable. They're going to die from that disease. And it's one of those things that would you vote someone guilty for doing that? From the parameters of law, yes, they're guilty. It doesn't matter what happens, they can't kill these people. Okay, well, by law, they're guilty. But a lot of people don't vote not guilty for things like that. So, I mean, but still, that doesn't change the fact that the evidence has still convinced you that, yes, they actually killed this person. So the evidence still convinces you that they killed them, but that's not going to be the only factor when making your decision. So it's like things like me, it's like I don't, disbelieve or I don't not believe because of, selfish pride or whatnot. It's just I have not been convinced by what has been presented to me that God does in fact exist. And that's why I do what I do, is I'm waiting to get a better understanding of what people believe and why of both, monotheistic religions as well as polytheistic religions. A lot of other religions have a lot of great parts to it too. A lot of great things, a lot of great information, and a lot of believable things, a lot of non-believable things. But it's just that none of them have convinced me that they're actually true. Um, as far as something like witnessing a miracle, or if I were to see someone walking on water, that would convince me that okay, there are things that can defy the laws of nature as we know it, and I would have no choice but to accept that. Um, so I mean, I wouldn't really say it's pride. It's that you don't really choose whether or not things convict you. You are either convinced or not convinced as the starting point, and then you go from there as what you do with that conviction. So that's why one things that I disagree with, biblically speaking, is when people aren't going to believe because of their pride. It's like, from a neurological standpoint, it's not pride has nothing to do with it. It's each and every person's brain and how their brain operates. They can't choose not to be convicted of someone's guilt. It's just hasn't convinced them. It's not they choose not to. It just doesn't. But
I did see the point that we start off from a position because of the inherited condition of being a sinner and receiving that from our first parent. We come into the world with that condition of being estranged from God, alienated. So the scripture would call us spiritually dead. We cannot connect with the spiritual things of God through our natural senses. So there is no way for us to know God unless He revealed Himself to us in some way or another. That being the case, I really think pride comes in when God does work to reveal Himself to us, and it becomes a matter of sin at one level or another, because Jesus Himself put it. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but the world through Him was saved. Therefore, whoever believes is not condemned, uh, but whoever believes not stands condemned already, for he has not believed in the name of God's only begotten Son. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, but the world loved darkness so they get hardened in their unbelief,
Yeah.
or spitefully rejecting God. But let me ask you a question, Robbie.
Okay.
If God exists, and you kind of already answered at least part one of my question. If God exists, do you really want to know Him?
What now?
If God exists, do you really want to know Him?
That's kind of one of those unanswerable questions for me. Um, from a moral standpoint, like people have asked me, if you find out God exists, would you, start believing in Him, going to church, blah blah blah. Well, if I find out that He does exist, of course, then yes, by default, I would believe in Him. But it would still take a lot for me to even begin to think about worshiping Him because I still don't agree with a lot of things He did. Like Sodom and Gomorrah slaughtering the entire village. I have a problem with that. Um, I would. I think the first thing that I would do is I would get clarification from like a parental standpoint. If you're a child and you do something and your parents tell you not to, and you ask why, a lot of those parents, even yours, may have said this because I'm the parent and you're the child. That's why, kind of thing. That's kind of the vibe I get off from the biblical God. It's like, well, don't question God. Well, why not? I mean, there's nothing wrong with finding out why. So if I were to find out God exists, one of the first things I would ever ask Him is, why did you command the slaughter of the men, women, children, infants, and cattle? Why not just, change? Or, when Moses went to free the slaves, why not just allow that to happen? Why did you have to harden the Pharaoh's heart to begin with? That you created a whole extra step for all these people. You by doing that, you cause them to be enslaved even longer by you doing that. I don't. If your purpose was to free slaves, why did you make it possible for them to be in slavery even longer? Why did you make it possible for them to be enslaved to begin with? And things like it doesn't really because like the Israelites were treated horribly by the Egyptians. That was horrible, horrible, horrible. They were treated insanely horrible there. And so, things like that, I would definitely ask. And then, depending on the response I got, that would be the yes or no in whether or not I would start worshiping him.
Okay. Can I tell you something, Robbie?
Sure.
We just found your pride. Do you realize that that may be the very reason, this, so why God has not seemingly revealed himself to you? If I'm going to take your stance on that at face value, let's just say God hasn't revealed himself to you. It may be because of that very pride. Understand where this is coming from. Not coming from an attitude of love, but understand what you're saying. Somebody put it best, I think. They said, we can ask God questions, but we cannot question God. And what they meant by that is we can ask God anything, but we don't have the authority to tell God how to run his world any more than a person has the right to come into your house on the inside of your house and tell you what color to paint your room.
I actually completely agree with that. Like people who live in a dictatorship society, you have absolutely no authority, no position to tell them how to run their country. But it wouldn't change the fact that maybe you have concerns or issues with how it is being ran, or just maybe questions. I mean, it's like nothing wrong. It's not really telling God, hey, maybe you should run it this way, or I think it would be better if you ran it this way. It would be more of a, I don't really understand this. Can you explain it to me? Kind of thing. Like even a dictatorship society, like when a while back when Colombia had, well not Colombia, Cuba had gotten rid of everyone who wasn't, pro Fidel. It's because he was a dictator and a lot of people didn't agree with the way he was running the country, so they kicked him out. but it's not really a thing. It's not really an issue of telling God how to run the world. It's more of an issue of this doesn't make sense. Let me get some clarification on it so it makes sense to me. Even a dictatorship society, even though you don't agree with things that happen, you have no authority and no position to tell them how it should be ran. All you can do is either obey by the rules or leave. But it's like, even though you stay there and follow the rules, wouldn't change the fact that inside you still question these things. You still don't agree with it, but you still follow the rules. Even within our society, even though I don't personally smoke marijuana, in my state it is illegal. But even if it was legal, doesn't mean that I, would do it. It's one of those things that even though I don't believe it should be illegal, doesn't change the fact that I'm still not going to do it. Or it's not that I choose not to do it because it's illegal. I just don't do it. It's not so. There are even laws today that I obey that I still don't necessarily agree with. But even though I have no position to tell them, hey, this law is stupid, let's change it, it's like, nah, well, I live here, I'm just going to obey by the rules, but I still have my concerns about it. I just kind of keep it to myself. So even when questioning God, it wouldn't be telling him how to do his job. I would just kind of get clarification so that I would understand. Which, if God is all knowing, then he would already know why I don't do these things.
But Rob, you realize at a certain level you're being dishonest with yourself, because if you're saying you would only conditionally worship him depending on what his answers are, then inwardly you are telling him how to run his world. Because if he gives you an answer, pardon me, if he gives you an answer that you disagree with, and you decide that you're not going to worship him based upon that, that is also de facto to say at a certain level that you believe that uh, 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 that you have a better answer to how it should be done, how it should be run, which is to put yourself in a position of being God.
Yeah, I think that's arguable on some level. Yeah. Um,
Well, if you, well, where would you exercise this? If you conceded the point, right? If you conceded the point that you wouldn't have the power to challenge God outwardly, what does one do then? You introverted. In your own mind and in your own heart, you say to yourself, "This should be done," or "I would do it like this," and you start thinking like that. And as it grows up in your heart, that turns into ideologies or philosophies, which ultimately find their way out, since from the abundance of a man's heart, just as the scripture says, from the abundance of a man's heart, so he speaks. You're going to share these ideologies, philosophies with others, and those like-minded people agree upon the plot with you,
I
and
mean,
then you have raised up your own kingdom of some sort on the earth, and now you're in the position of opposing God.
yeah. I mean, I still think that on some level, everyone questions God, maybe just because they don't understand why. Like most of my family is Christian, or no, I certainly shouldn't say Christian, but they're theists. I have a lot of Southern Baptists as well as Pentecostal family, as well as Mormons. And anytime like a family member of mine dies, one of the first things that people say is, like, why God, why kind of thing. And I don't normally hear them say, well, it was meant to be as soon as someone dies. That's really not the first thing that goes through their head. So, I mean, on some level, everyone questions God, and I just think they kind of have to go through their own personal judgment or revelation, if you will, on why things are the way they are, and then based on that conclusion is how they're going to go about their life from that point. So I mean, on some level, I believe everyone does, and I would just as a person, it will be like a parent, or as a child, as I should say, just to be more curious. So if I was to find out why, or if I was to find out God existed, I would just ask him, why he did some of the things he did. Just, just so I would know. I mean, if he said something like "because I can," then yeah, I'd probably have a problem with that. But I really don't think that would be the answer I got.
Let me ask you, Rob. Can you pull up on your computer Proverbs 19?
Proverbs 19:3.
Yeah.
Wait, that one's really familiar. Hold on, that one's really familiar. Bu-bu-bu-bu-bum. Psalms 19:3. Well, you said 1999. Just kidding. 19:3. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard.
No, Proverbs
Oh,
19.
Proverbs. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Boy, that sort of sounded like Peter Griffin.
the foolishness of man perverteth his way, and his heart fitteth them against the Lord. The foolishness of man perverteth his way, and the heart fretteth against the Lord.
Hey, Robbie, you're not having trouble hearing me, are you?
And at first, it was just like really, really like low, like really, really faint. So I just turned up my mic a little, my earphones a little bit.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Oh, my mic volume is or oh, let's see. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you, Redline, for that. Okay. Did you find it, Robbie?
yeah, I got it.
Did you read it?
The foolishness of man perverteth his way, and his heart fretteth against the Lord.
You know, that's true at an individual level, in so many ways that we see just about every day. But I think this same verse can be applied in a more uh, uh, broad spectrum level, in a sense of apply the foolishness of men to Father Adam. Even though you don't seem to believe in the concept of Adam and Eve, but apply it to Father Adam, and it would read the foolishness of the man or Father Adam perverted his way. Now, second here applies to us, and our heart fretteth against the Lord. And I said it that way because all the sin and death and the calamity at large, with few exception or minor exception, that has come into human history, has been done by us. And it started with our forefather, who has brought sin, death, and destruction into all our lives. You look around and see the pedophilia, the rape, the murder, the drug abuse, the suicide, all this. All this started with one man choosing to say no to God, under listening to a lie
Oh,
that
oh,
contradicted what he did know about God,
oh, oh,
and he believed the lie that said ultimately that gain would that God is holding out on you. God is holding back your full potential if you disobey God God doesn't want you to do this because he's holding out on you. He's holding you back. So do this and you will be like God.
Yeah.
And we see that same mentality being perpetuated by a lot of atheists and anti-theists, even here on YouTube, perpetuating that same philosophy to try to deconvert those weak in the faith. The very same strategy. That's another proof to the legitimacy of the scripture because they're employing the exact same method. I call it in one of my videos on YouTube the circumcised brainwashing method.
Yeah.
But I started to read you something before. It was actually this why I asked you the question. Deuteronomy 4:29. It says, "But if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul." If you came to God, Robbie, if you somehow was to and I know the fact is none of us can actually do this unless God again help us to do it. That's how estranged from Him we are in our sin. But if we came to God willing to humble ourselves and submit to Him, no matter what his doings or His will was, uh, God would be more likely to reveal Himself to us. And here's why: our obedience is not something that God should have to earn. It is His by right of who He is. We give God this credit and this privilege or this position of authority over us so often to ourselves according to His merit. But God has right over us. We are morally obligated to obey Him just because of who He is. Without Him, we do not exist. Without Him willing us into existence, we would have no purpose in even being here. That's why if someone says uh, a person kills a person, it's wrong. So if God kills a person, it's not wrong. Why is God not wrong? It's because that person, if a person takes it out of their own free mind and will, they are stealing something from God. God put that life in you. God made that human being for you for His purpose. So you are presuming to take something out of God's hand. Whereas if God takes them out Himself for some purpose, God is the one who put that person into being for His purpose. For His purpose, they came to being. So it's only natural for His purpose that they should be. We have the only place where we have a purpose separate from the purpose of our Maker is in our own minds and hearts. And if we say we should have right to our own purpose because we are living souls, we're sentient beings, that presents two problems. First of all, the faculty by which we are living beings or conscious beings is because and this is the claim of the scripture, that God breathed the breath of life into us and made us living souls. So our capacity to feel, will, think, and reason, all those faculties belong to Him and were given by His provision, which was an extension of His will. That's number one. And two, if one wants to make a simple argument about us being sentient beings, and so we should have autonomy. Animals are also sentient beings, and we claim the right to rule over them every day. There's no, well, there is one guy out there who rules them, but there are a few people out there down at the courthouses around the world, politicking and lobbying for animals to have a say. But all this is to say that if you look for God with all your heart and all your soul, and you come to Him willing to say, God, if you reveal yourself, I will submit to you, He will indeed reveal Himself. In second to Deuteronomy 4:29 in the New Testament, John chapter 7, what is it, verse 16? Uh, uh, Jesus answered them and said, my doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me. If any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. So if one wants to know whether God, whether the doctrine of the scriptures, whether Jesus' teachings are of God or whether they must be of man, just put it to the test like Jesus said here. Ask anyone to follow Jesus' teaching for 4 years, let's say. That's the biblical cutoff point. 4 years. Follow Jesus' teachings for 4 years and see if God doesn't truly reveal himself. This is
Yeah.
what we
So, I mean, things like that
go
though.
ahead.
Oh, sorry. Things like that, like when people have, oh, you used to tell me that, you first have to believe and then he'll be revealed. Things like that. That is actually also explained by modern means. That's arbitrary supplementative subjectiveness, which is also
No,
how.
I mean, do it even unbelieving.
Yeah, I mean, that's like also like how people beat lie detectors tests. Like, if you believe a lie is true, then to you, you're actually then like you can convince yourself that a lie is true. So then, when asked about it, you actually truly believe that it's the truth, even though it's not. Which I mean, that's kind of one of those things. If you have to, first have to believe it and then do all these things. It's like, but that's how you convince yourself a lie is true, by making yourself believe it first, which is like why the laws of logic go against that. You don't believe it's true first and then it's revealed to you. You have to make like with the scientific method, you have to form a hypothesis. Then you have to test it, repeat it, have others do the same thing. And then that's when it comes into conflict with modern ways. You can have something happen and say, oh, well, it was this was this was this. Okay, well, if you were to, repeat that, or not you want to repeat it, but if someone else was to look at it and say, that doesn't, point to this, like, if someone was to, get sick, you know, take medicine as well as, praying for healing, when people say, oh, I was healed, God healed me. Well, was it God that healed you? Was it the medicine that healed you? Or was it your body's natural immune system? People are so quick to say, oh, it was God because I prayed for it. It's like, well, yeah, you prayed for it, but that doesn't mean that it was actually answered by him. He could have said no, but then the medicine could have healed you. And that's when it's one of those things that it don't matter how much you believe it, if you can't, actually prove it, then believing it would have absolutely no point whatsoever. Which is why if I can't prove it, then I don't believe that it's true. I believe that it's possible. Which I've done that a lot in my life when writing my theses for school. I've made these different hypotheses or opinions about things, believed they were true, and some of them I could actually prove that were true, and for others I couldn't. Therefore, I didn't believe that they were true. I believed that it was possible. But for people to say you have to believe it first, that's against the laws of logic.
Well, again, here my challenge, Robbie.
All right.
I said the challenge is for you to put into practice the teachings of Jesus without unbelieving. If you don't believe in him, don't believe in him or don't cede your unbelief. Just acknowledge what's due to be acknowledged, that there is a possibility that God exists. Is that fair?
Okay, your challenge is to.
Would you see that it's possible that God does exist?
Yes, I acknowledge that it's possible.
Okay, it's possible that God exists. if God does exist, do you want to know God?
Mm, I'm iffy. It's hard to say yes, and it's hard to say no.
Oh, okay. So there's no real reason when you put it like that. There's no real reason for God to reveal Himself to you, because even if you did know Him, there's chance here, and it sounds like a strong one, that you wouldn't obey Him, that you wouldn't serve Him. And and in fact, if that's the case, it's better for you that God doesn't reveal Himself, because to whom much is given, from the same much is required. The more you know about God, the more accountability you accrue to yourself on the day of judgment. And consider this, Robbie. If God is the one in whom we live, move, and have our being, are you really prepared to stand against Him? And even if you were, the question becomes why, when you're included in the fact that God so loved the world, God so loved us while we were yet sinners, disobeying Him, that He gave His only begotten Son to die to atone for our sins. Why die? Because God has said that the life of the flesh is in the blood, and God has said, I have given the blood upon the altar to be atonement for the soul. Why? Because God said the soul that sins, it must die. Why? Because by God's word, by His command, He made everything that is, including living, the living. So life comes by the word of God. Therefore, if you break the word of God, you naturally are owed death. Inherently, you are owed death. Since you chose to
No.
or we chose to disconnect ourselves from the source by which God gives life. In fact, the very ability for us to hang around as sinners for whatever duration of time God has given us to hang around is is an example of His grace even upon the wicked, because we should all die immediately as soon as we sin. But the fact that we're allowed to hang around until either we're converted or we fill out the days written in His book for us, even if we're not converted, is a unilateral act of God's grace.
Mm,
Personally,
it- yeah, it was just it's as someone who follows the laws of logic. It's I work like in reverse with the laws of logic. Like I'm not going to believe something is true or accept that something is true until it can be proven, and I'm not going to seek out what's possible, which is what I used to do until I started questioning it. And since then, it's like, okay, well, that didn't work. So now, that's one of the reasons why I do what I do. That's one of the key reasons right there is that doing what I do, someone may actually be the one to be able to prove that he actually exists. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So if God is real, then what I'm doing, why I'm doing, would pretty much be a key element in his plan. That, some people say that arguing with atheists strengthens my belief or strengthens my faith. Well, from my standpoint, then if God does exist, then I would be one of the people that's really good to help out his followers. But um, that's pretty much why I do what I do, is to get a better understanding of what people believe and why, and through that, then that would make me get it closer if they could actually form a good solid argument without defying the laws of logic or nature as we know it. But which is why I said all it would take for me to believe something like miracles happen, or that something beyond what we can observe happens, if something were like, someone walk on water, my pride would get in the way. I'm not going to say, oh well, it was fake. If we actually go out somewhere like the ocean and someone just jumps out of a boat and starts walking, I'm not going to really question that. That's one of those. Okay, dude, you win, you win.
Yeah, but Robbie, what you're asking for is faith that would condemn you. And here's why I say that again. It goes back that the more you know about God, the more accountability you will have on the day of judgment. And if you choose to disobey him, or as the scripture puts it, having been enlightened, take pleasure in unrighteousness, or that's to say, take pleasure or take your stand not being right in right standing with God, then it'll be worse for you on the day of judgment. So is faith, it would be faith if God did satisfy your curiosity, faith that will make things worse for you, just according to how you stand now. And you really cannot justify conditionally if God did reveal himself to you, you cannot justify conditionalizing following him. Because think about it, Robbie. Let me ask you, do you fantasize about girls in your head?
Do what now?
Do you fantasize about girls in your head?
Oh yeah,
Uh, do you have your way with those girls in your head?
sometimes.
Let me ask you, as you're fantasizing, do you give them a choice?
If I'm fantasizing,
No,
do I
no,
give them a choice?
no. In your
Oh, okay.
fantasies, do you give them a choice?
I don't really understand that. That's
Do you give them a choice, or does your fantasy play out just the way you want it to play out?
I guess in the way I want them to pan out.
No, come on, be honest, Robbie. In your own fantasies, does anything happen in your fantasies other than what you will to happen in your fantasy?
No.
No, so you make the object in your fantasy, in your mental platform, where you have as much control as a human being can have. You make the objects in that platform to do your will because you are sovereignly, as much as a human being can be, in control.
Well, no, because I don't control my thoughts. I don't control my brain. My brain controls me.
Sure, you
You don't
control your
control your thoughts.
sure you control your thoughts, Robbie.
But the laws of the brain goes against that. You can't control your
Think of
thoughts.
anything right now. Think of the color yellow. Did you think of yellow?
That's not how the brain works.
Think about anything. You pick. Did you think about something?
That's not how the brain works. The moment you say to think about something, another part of the brain starts to register the thoughts because it's also getting the input of you telling me to think about something. That part of me, you telling me to think about something, is being registered already by a different part of the brain. Then the thoughts of registering, or the not the thoughts of registering, the
No, not.
activity of me actually registering those thoughts come into play in a different part of the brain.
Come on,
You
Robbie.
don't control your
Don't
thoughts.
don't don't BS, Robbie. Because if I told you
I'm not. Anyone who studies the brain can tell you that you do not control your thoughts. It is
if I
physically
told you
impossible.
if I told you not if I told you right now to go out and stand out in the middle of the street, would you do it?
If you were to tell me to go stand out in the middle of the street,
Yeah,
probably
hypothetically.
not. Probably not.
Right, you would exercise your will to say
Actually, no. I would use my experience, which again is part of the brain, to say if I go out in the middle of the street, then there's a good chance I can get hit by a car.
Right,
Therefore,
and that
I'll do it.
experience would in turn inform your will, and you would choose not to do it.
That's not how the brain works.
It's how the brain that I experience works.
Then you must have a different brain than everyone who has like PhDs studying the brain. That's not how it works. It's what influences your thoughts and actions, whereas you're consciously you do not have free will. Subconsciously you follow this. I mean, consciously you only follow the decisions that are subconsciously made for you. Like when my brain registers standing in the middle of the street, it thinks about, hey, well, I know that if I stand out in the middle of the street, then I can get hit by a car, and that part of the brain is what tells my conscious part of the brain to say, hey, you're not really going to do this type of thing. Like I said, like if you're handed
However,
two, like I can hook
if you
you.
wanted to commit suicide, you would overrule that side of the brain, and you would go out in that street and stay there because you wanted to get hit by a car.
Actually, no. Even pulling, like, if I were gonna, shoot myself, then again, my brain would still influences that decision and makes that decision, for you. Like again, like you can be handed two magazines. I can hook you up to an EEG machine. I can tell you, pick one of these magazines to read. I can tell you which magazine you're going to choose to read before you know you're going to choose to read it. Because they're registered at different parts of the brain, I can tell you what you're going to think before you know you're going to think about it. I can tell you things that you're thinking before, or that you don't even know, because your brain is constantly thinking. So you're not even aware of some of the things that you're thinking. I can tell you some of the things you're thinking without you even knowing you're thinking them. Again, that's what I said. The brain doesn't work that way.
So really, you don't believe in personal accountability, then, is what you're saying.
From what we as a society do, that's different from personal accountability. Do I believe things are or should be arrested for the things they do?
Yes.
That's a touchy subject.
So
Because the brain belongs to this person who does this thing, and this person did this thing, their brain pretty much did it, therefore, it's
so
still not accountable
so
for it.
okay. So you're saying that people that murder, rape, and all steal and all that should be allowed to walk around on the streets with arrest warrants. Is what you're
No,
saying?
I never said that. Like, if you were to kill someone,
I mean,
uh,
I didn't say that you said it, but you're sort of implying it by the notion that human beings are not really responsible for themselves. If everything is preset, and ultimately it sounds like you're getting at being predetermined, then everything that is must happen. Therefore,
well, actually, I'm not saying it's predetermined to happen.
what is it
That's
that's if it's not will, then what is it that's making the determination according to the claim that you're making?
predetermined would be that it's already set out that it's going to happen. But things like that, like things like some of the action that I'm going to do a week from now, it's not predetermined because my brain hasn't registered, that far ahead yet. It doesn't think like that. That's really not how it does. So a week from now, when something happened, you can't say that it was already predetermined or it was not predetermined to happen because from right now, it's not predetermined what I'm going to do already a week from now. But again, like if someone were to if someone were to do something like murder someone, then I'll say, okay, well then, the person done this. Okay, then you say, well then you got someone like me to say, oh well they didn't actually do it because their brain works this way, in which yes the brain does work that way. It still doesn't change the fact that this person did this, which is why people who are under hypnosis and they still commit crimes. they're still held accountable by law. They're still held accountable, even though they have no recollection of what they're actually doing while they're under hypnosis. They still do these things, and they're still technically held accountable for that. So even though, you know, these thoughts and processes register in the brain, and then you act upon those things, does it still doesn't change the fact that as a society we still can hold you accountable for that, because your brain does belong to you, and that is what killed this person. Therefore, you're still being held
Yeah,
accountable.
but
So
ultimately,
I can say that because your
ultimately,
brain makes you do
we
these
say we
things.
don't control our brain.
Exactly.
Okay, if that's the case, then how? Then we can't control what we do.
Exactly.
So how can you hold someone accountable for which they cannot at all control?
Okay. Well, if you were to kill someone, who, if you were to kill someone, I can say that your brain pretty much forced you to do that. Who does that brain belong to? You. Therefore, I can hold you accountable. Which is
Yeah,
why, like, a lot of
but
parents are held accountable
but
if their
why?
children do something.
But why?
The brain did it. So, therefore, I can punish the holder of the brain. Like, society can punish the parents. Like, as a society, we can punish parents for a lot of actions that children do. The parents didn't do it. Yeah, but your kids did. Therefore, you're responsible. Is that right? Should parents be held accountable for something that a whole nother person did? It's that same principle.
If the child, yes, if the child is under their jurisdiction and is not under legal age to authorize themselves, yes.
Okay. And you're under your brain's jurisdiction. It tells you what to do. Well, the people who I cannot
The,
remember the name of the disease where they
the brain
like
tells you what the brain
yeah,
tells you what to do
yeah,
according to what.
the brain tells you what to do according to the brain. It's how the brain operates. We can prove this
How does the brain choose between two choices?
because one part of one section of the brain registers your thoughts. So if you were handed a magazine to choose, you're going to look at the covers of the magazines. Your brain registers the images that it sees, and based on your experiences, your habits, your likes, your dislikes, one of them is going to appear more appealing to you. Therefore, once the images are processed in one part of the brain, it goes to another part of the brain that pretty much lets you know, hey, this one is more appealing to you. I'm going to choose to read this one. You open up that one because it's some of your likes. Yeah, I like
So
this
something
thing.
is more appealing to you gives you more pleasure.
Yeah,
See,
but like
so
one thing.
so you're proven wrong right there because there are things that give us alternative and choices that we make every day that would give us more pleasure, but sometimes in life we choose not to do that that would give us for more pleasure for some other reason or value. So
Well,
for
I'm not saying you're always going to do what gives you the most pleasure. Like you can choose between, you know, if someone say, hey, we can either go out to dinner tonight or we can stay at home and have sex. Well, even though sex will give you more pleasure, you say, hey, going out to dinner is nice. Your brain can also register those thoughts. I like going out to eat. I like eating. I like getting to know you better. I like this on a different emotional level. So it still registers
the choosing
alternatives of these two things.
is an expression of will,
But it's not free will because you're not making that decision. Your brain is making it for you.
but your brain is part of you, so you are making that decision.
That is why we can hold people
Unless you would
accountable
be,
for their actions. That's exactly why we
but
can
that's
hold
what I
people
was
accountable
trying
for
to
their
tell you. You were the
actions.
one presenting the picture as if the brain almost was like a separate entity. The brain is part of you. The
Well,
extra.
yeah, I understand. Like the brain is part of you. I'm just saying that it pretty much tells you what to do. The best example that I used in my thesis for neurophysiology is a twitch. I cannot remember the name of the disease, but it's where twitching is like on a whole new level. Like their like limbs can like swing up really really high, whereas ours is kind of like a really quick twitch. And people who have that disease, they are not held accountable by law if they were to reach up really quick and hit somebody. They're not held accountable by law for assault, which, as if me or you were to walk up and just hit someone, then yes, we can be legally held accountable for assault. But people who have that disease are not held accountable for assault because your body parts move when a signal is sent from your brain to that body part, moving it. Once that signal is sent, you as a conscious being cannot choose to not move it. It's going to move whether you want it to or not. And if someone has this disease, once that signal is sent to your arm for your arm to swing up really high, if you were to hit someone, legally they are not held accountable for that. So even as a society, we have understood these things as we've studied the brain more, that people have these impulses that no, they cannot control, and therefore because of that they're not held accountable. Like people who have Tourette's syndrome, they're not held accountable for the
Rob,
things they say because they can't control it.
Rob,
What's up?
almost coming to the end of my time at the computer lab, so I want to
Oh,
throw
okay.
off a minute and a half statement or so. And
Okay.
first of all, for those who are watching now or those who will be watching later on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. I'd like to thank you, Robbie Romance, for coming in to my hangout and joining me. I've enjoyed our conversation. This has been quite an informative conversation. But instead of making a statement to the audience, I want to spend the next minute or so making a statement to you, Robbie.
Okay.
Robbie, the fact of the matter is, whether you believe it or not, whether you receive it or not, whether you can test it or not, uh, well, you definitely can't test it through the scientific method. So, uh, at least not in the way that we're accustomed to. But God loves you, Robbie. God loves you, and He desires for you to be in right standing with Him. God desires the salvation of your soul. We've heard you say on this program that if God did reveal Himself to you, that you would only follow Him. You said you would believe if He saved every bit of life, every portion of your life. You would believe in God's existence, but even with that belief, you would only follow Him, you would only worship Him, conditional upon your questioning of Him and His motives on different things. But I tell you the truth, Robbie, for God's purpose have all things been created. For His purpose, they exist. God works out all things after the counsel of His will. As part of His will, He expressed that He takes His pleasure in the just the unrighteous, and the wicked, when those who are not right with Him, when those who are doing their own thing instead of obeying Him. He is pleased when they do right, when they turn from their ways and live. For that purpose, God sent His Son into the world because we were already lost in sin. The soul that sins, God said, all souls belong to Him. The soul that sins shall die. That's His holy and righteous judgment, righteous because by God's word, He made everything and gave life to the living. By God's word, He sustains everything. And sin is disobeying His word, and so we inherently cut ourselves off from that life. But understand, Robbie, that God so loved you that He sent His Son to die to pay the death that you owe and I owe for our sins. He sent His Son to pay for that. And that's because He wanted us to by faith we believe on Him and repent so that we can have right standing with Him, clean from sin, able then to enter into His kingdom because He wants to give us everlasting life Relevance. Brother, I pray that Jesus saves your soul, but I gotta go now because I'm running over time now. But we'll talk soon.